In this video, we're talking about a young college student who experienced acts of hotel hauntings and wound up going through traumatic, suffering encounters all by herself, far away from home, which would end up finding herself in her own missing persons case. Elisa was a 21-year-old college student, born and raised in Canada. Apart from studying, she also ran an entire blog separately in her downtime, and there she would often express her thoughts and just how she was feeling. And around 2012, she wrote one of those blog posts which she elaborated on how she was struggling mentally. She had actually gone through a relapse and she was feeling like she really wasn't succeeding the way she wanted to. And those mental struggles also came with a lifelong diagnosis. Elisa had bipolar disorder, and with that disorder also came several prescription medications that she was given to try and help treat her condition. But in the past, and especially on multiple different occasions, she's had those relapses more than once, where she would have delusions and hallucinations after not taking her medication. Those times she would literally forget who she was, where she was, what she was doing. There were definitely signs of this throughout every corner of her life, and even the way she described her own life. And although she wasn't the type of student to really dedicate her entire life to her studies and that deep focus, her classmates, her peers, generally knew her as one of the nicest, kindest people they'd ever met. Although she was now a couple of years into her college career at the University of British Columbia, she was finding herself at a sort of crossroads, trying to make a decision, trying to take her life wherever she thought would be best for herself, and as a part of those decisions, it was going to be a big, massive road trip, solo, which would be part of this tragic story. And aside from how her classmates would describe her, a detective Marcia, who throughout in this story of what turned out to be a horrific case for Elisa, would interview the family and say that her sister would describe her as a person who wouldn't really take her medication. And this resulted in multiple of these occasions where she would relapse and have these sort of mental breakdowns. It was about a year that had passed on January 26th, where she would decide to pack everything up, leave school, go on this road trip thousands of miles away for a couple of months down the coast of California on a solo trip. While there, she would stop at beautiful and interesting places like the San Diego Zoo before she'd make her way through Los Angeles, and there she would make one of her most prominent stops at this hotel called the Cecil Hotel, which was established as this iconic building in 1924 located in the Skid Row area. Not only is it this old, giant, iconic building, but just like how Elisa went through her own mental state of struggles, this 700-room hotel also had its own dark, twisted tales of people that had their own mental struggles within its very walls. In fact, a lot of the previous guests and dark, twisted tales of people that have stayed in the building previous to Elisa, they were that of straight up nightmares. Some of these people were serial killers who lurked throughout the hallways of this building, and even some rumors of paranormal activity and hauntings that happened in those rooms. One of the tenants of the Cecil Hotel's past was none other than the Night Stalker, this coined famous serial killer named Richard Ramirez, who during his entire murder spree stayed in the Cecil Hotel the entire time, plotting each and every one of his attacks on LA victims. Now, Elisa, while she was staying in this hotel, she had no idea about the dreadful and dark things that happened within its very walls. All she was planning to do was take a getaway solo trip, try and experience life and get a little taste of what the real world had to offer just for a little bit. Even as Elisa was staying there, she still couldn't figure out a way to get away from her mental state, her struggles that were that constant battle for her. And she really wasn't getting along with even the guests that were also staying there at the time. Even the hotel's manager, named Price, bear witness to just kind of the behavioral patterns of Elisa as she was roaming around the hallways, as saying that she was sort of dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, and sort of acting erratic in general. And she was even sharing a room with a couple of other ladies in this hotel, and those ladies were kind of being harassed by Elisa. She would literally lock them out of the room so that they couldn't get in and have that shared space with her. and she would even tell them to go away or go home. And luckily, before this really escalated, before Elisa had one of her other episodes, Price, the hotel manager, eventually moved Elisa out of that shared space of the hotel room and put her into her own private area of a separate room. And after that, Elisa would just kind of go on her way. But she was still found by the hotel staff to sort of be roaming around, going to random areas of the hotel, particular areas where guests usually weren't even allowed to go in. Found herself in the hotel lobby, but in that moment, the hotel staff bear witness to her basically screaming, saying, I'm crazy, but so is LA. We're both crazy, so what? And eventually they had to stop her in that moment and ask her to leave the lobby and go back to her room. Now, this could have been one of those times where she had forgotten to take her medication, or maybe she even chose not to take her medication and she was having one of those experiences, one of those panic attacks where she was hallucinating or having those delusions in the hotel lobby. It was this moment that her life was going to change and the darkness of the entire area was going to succumb to her, full of danger. She went down the hallway, got in the elevator, and from that moment on, everything would be different. Once she did get in the elevator, she tried to use it to go back up, but instead of going back up, she just disappeared. She disappeared from within the elevator. How could that have happened to her? How could she have gone in an elevator and just have teleported somewhere else out of it? Might have one of the hotel staff grabbed her out of the elevator and taken her back to her room themselves? Might it have been one of these other insane people, one of these serial killers that was lurking there waiting for her as a victim? She was expected to be checking out of the hotel that next day. I mean, she wasn't one of these long-term guests at the Cecile Hotel like these other serial killers or other people might have been staying there for weeks on end, but she was never known to check out of the hotel. And now it was January 31st, and this entire time, she was communicating with her parents back and forth, letting them know each and every day where she was, what she was doing, giving them the entire rundown of her extravagant experience. They didn't get any updates from her. They were scared for her life. Her parents, at this point, they knew. They knew that something was off. It was out of character for their daughter. Not only might she have been off of her meds, but she was all alone, thousands of miles away out of Canada at this point. And so they took it upon themselves to now call the local Los Angeles Police Department and report their daughter missing. They would even take it a step further. Besides just calling to report her missing, they would themselves get in the car and drive all the way up from Canada down to California through the entire road trip avenues that she took herself on this getaway trip where she was trying to just readjust her mindset. They would end up at the Cecile Hotel and they would start beginning to help the LA Police Department with the search efforts. Now, this entire building, her room, the entire nearby neighborhood area, it was all crawling with police and investigators and detectives. But after maybe about a day and a half of searching all around the area for her, they turned up with nothing, and they were running out of options. Eventually, the LA detectives would switch up their search efforts and instead go from within the hotel and around the hotel to look at the security cameras to see if they might have caught her walking around in any obscure areas. It wasn't until the LA detectives had gone through hundreds of hours scrubbing through that week and the previous week of the security camera footage that they would eventually spot Elisa roaming around the hallways and around the hotel before she had gone missing in that elevator. But that's just it. That was the only place that she was last known to be seen by the hotel staff within the Cecile Hotel. She wasn't outside. The last place that they had demanded that she go from the lobby to her room was the elevator. And that's exactly where it showed her in this footage. Elisa was indeed in that elevator. She didn't just get in and go up to her room. She actually ended up pushing a bunch of the elevator buttons, acting really out of place and erratic, almost like she was in a state of fear or panic, being followed. Was she in danger after all? They saw her as she was not only pushing these buttons, but peering her head out, trying to see if someone was out there in the hallway, as if she was maybe even talking to someone in that moment. Well, that elevator actually never ended up actually closing for her, and she never actually traveled up the floors of the hotel in the first place. And Elisa, she pretty much got up and just walked out of the elevator as if nothing happened. She just casually went about her way as if she wasn't just acting erratic and in a state of panic. What made this situation even more strange, eerie, and bizarre was the state of her belongings. One of the areas that investigators had checked while coming through the area and that footage of the elevator was Elisa's room. And when they checked her room, they had found out that the housekeeping staff had already gone by, swept and cleaned the room, made it nice and tidy for the next guest. But they had also packaged all of her things, like her laptop, her wallet, her backpack, even her medications were still in the room, as if she'd never really left. That same Detective Marcia from earlier, who had spoken with her sister about the time she had missed taking her medication, also spoke about how the hotel staff described the room and how they found it a complete mess. But it wasn't messy in terms of foul play or in terms of any forced entry or anything like that. There wasn't even really any drugs, no drug paraphernalia, and although there wasn't really any evidence of any foul play or any sign of forced entry in Elisa's hotel room, while there was some other stuff going on in the hotel still, some of the guests had started making complaints about a certain situation to the management that was indeed connected to her disappearance. It was now February 19th, where detectives, police officers, everyone in the surrounding area was still checking the area outside of the hotel, trying to pick up some kind of evidence that led to where she might have disappeared to, but no one knew that the evidence was really right under their noses, and Elisa was still lurking very nearby the hotel itself. It was these very hotel guests' complaints to the hotel management that led the entire investigation back into the hotel, and it started with how these guests were complaining about the hotel's water pressure, and how it had suddenly and abruptly weakened over the past couple of days, almost like the pipes had been plugged up. They had also started to describe the water itself and how it began to have this very foul odor and taste to it as they were using it to take showers, brush their teeth, brew their coffee, and it got so bad to the management getting these complaints that it stirred up enough of a concern that they decided to send the hotel maintenance worker up to the roof of the Cecile Hotel to check on what was happening with this. During this time, the detectives would now use their presence back in the hotel building to do a second pass-through of the entire investigation walkthrough. This time, they would check the basement level that they'd missed the first time around, and they would also follow the hotel maintenance worker up to the roof. And they would also bring scent tracking dogs with them, give the scent of Elisa's belongings to the dogs, and those dogs would lead them back up to the room where Elisa was staying, on the opposite side of her room, specifically where a window overlooked an opposite street and was connected to a fire escape. A man named Santiago Lopez, who was the hotel maintenance worker, eventually went up to the roof to try and search for the root of the problem as to why these hotel guests were experiencing sudden weakening of the water pressure and this foul taste in the water itself, eventually checking the tanks that were right there near the window where Elisa's room was. He was quoted when checking the water saying, "The roof has 4 tanks. It has a ladder to go from the roof up to this area where it hosts the tanks. On one of the main tanks that circulates the water throughout all of the other tanks is a latch on the top. Well, I went to go have a look and opened the hatch, and that's when I saw her. There she was, floating in the water tank, naked, completely white like a ghost. And she was dead." Yes, that entire time that she was thought to be missing, where her parents and her family drove down from Canada to California with the search party of the LA detectives, the detectives were scrubbing through all this footage, watching her as she was scared, acting erratic in the elevator, seemingly to just disappear off the map. For weeks, she was stuck in that tank, just decomposing, drowned and dead, floating in that water, which is why these hotel guests were now tasting this foulness to the water, because her bodily acids of the decomposition from being weeks in this water, they were tasting her rotting flesh. What even happened during that time where they had seen her frantically acting like she was being attacked in the elevator footage up until the moment she disappeared from the elevator, going all the way back up to her room and ending up face down, dead, rotting in this tank? Well, the entire area of that rooftop was searched. Everything was fingerprinted, trying to look for any clues. These detectives were looking for any little piece of evidence as to what had happened that caused her to be in this tank. There was no signs of any movement, any struggle. It would have been impossible for someone to throw her or put her in the tank themselves. Overall, those detectives said that they came up empty-handed. They couldn't find any evidence as to how she got in that tank, and her being murdered was nearly impossible the way that she was in that tank. Even her clothes had floated all the way to the bottom of the tank, and she was just there. The autopsy they performed revealed that there was no evidence of struggle, no signs of bodily harm or damage, no way that somebody could have physically attacked her to end up like this. Even the toxicology reports, those results showed that there was nothing in her system that could have led to anything mentally about this. She was not taking any drugs. She wasn't high off of anything. Her death was ultimately ruled out as an accidental drowning, and her bipolar disorder was just an underlying factor of what could have possibly influenced this tragedy that led to her corpse in the tank. But this has never really been enough for anybody to justify how all of these steps, especially the bizarre time that she disappeared from the elevator, or she got into this tank in the first place. Since Elisa's death, the hotel is now closed completely. The building was eventually sold off as a housing complex in 2021, but the entire place is now just this haunted atmosphere. And Elisa, she has just really been added to the tales, mysteries, and tragic events, really, that happened within the Cecil Hotel's walls. What do you think happened to Elisa, and how do you think she wound up rotting in that tank as a college student that was just trying to find a new breath of fresh air for her life?